Religion is a tricky topic to tackle. Conversations about it always tends to lead to more confusion or conflict amongst the talking bodies, where the concluding answers are perceived as insults towards their belief, faith, or religious teachings. It's extremely tough to take a side and not offend the other. No matter which way you lean, you're bound to instigate provocation from a group. Yes, one can be neutral in them, but what's the point of this if I don't have any concrete ideals? So of course I'll not take such stance. However, I will not simply mention my points, but express them by taking a distance from an artistic medium that I deeply adore: cinema, specifically the films that establishes itself in the fiction-based genres, mainly being horror. Because why not? Okay, there is a reason. As I've said in the past, horror is one of the best genres where you can carefully discuss and dissect numerous hard-hitting and sensitive topics. The others being sci-fi and fantasy to a certain degree. However, horror is quite special. The vastness to its meaning and its boundless means of being portrayed makes it more flexible than the aforementioned genres. It can be set in any time period, location, and lands that are foreign or familiar to us. Visually, it can be presented in various ways. And it doesn't even end there. The context, themes, or subject matter further solidifies its versatile merit. The questions that it has the ability to inquire is what makes certain horror titles ahead of their time, where they are either misunderstood for certain out-of-reach reasons or simply get ignored for their absurdist aspects. Now, with that explanation out of the way, I can introduce the religion side of it. Since its inception, horror has been associated with religious concepts to a certain degree, from contemplating about death and what happens beyond that, to characters who defy God, such as Satan and Lucifer, or mythical creatures like vampires and werewolves, or numerous other dastardly beings from regional folktales that were told to instill fear inside children so they behave obediently. They differ from culture to culture. However, the morals behind them is what unites them, as generally they abide with the authoritative religious beliefs that consists of strict rules that are to be followed for one's survival's sake or for the safety of their soul. These sort of stories were passed on for generations until they were immortalized by being captured in the cinematic medium. All those tales that were told to scare kids got visualized to haunt the adults. Earlier works in the horror genre took clear inspiration from them, and as time went by, the categorization broadened, which led to the birth of dozens of subgenres. And films that focused on religion were one of the most noteworthy out of them. There is a great deal of titles that can be used in here as an example, particularly from the 20th century. However, I want to shine a light onto a series that was made by a director who is immensely near and dear to my heart: Midnight Mass by Mike Flanagan. As it is with any of his work, I was exceedingly excited about the release of that series and was looking forward to analyze that to an extent by making videos on it. Well, that didn't happen, as I wasn't that pleased with it. Now, don't get me wrong, it is by all means a great piece of work and a fine addition to his already vast and vibrant filmography. But this one was a tad bit different from his past works, and that's where my personal quandary with it lies. With majority of his previous projects, there was a sense of universality to them, especially the series prior to it, The Haunting of Hill House and Bly Manor, and all of the issues that were dealt in them. Grief, mental illnesses, and past trauma resurfacing are some of the core elements in his work. Well, it's not like they aren't present in the one question here. However, my problem derives from the way it was presented. I am not a Christian, which happens to be the prominent commonality amongst the people who were deeply touched or moved by it. And it makes sense as to why it is so. The series is set in an island full of people who follow Christianity and give off cultic vibes. The stranded feel to it adds further layers of hopelessness to the dim possibility of ever escaping that place, which is like a huge thing in religious cults, or even in surroundings that are heavily religious with their motives and activities. It can be simply for religious differences as to why it didn't click for me, as I too come from a hardcore religious background where my upbringing was massively influenced by it, but apparently in a different manner. This is not to fault Mike Flanagan's writing or the lack of inclusion in it, as Midnight Mass does possess one of the most respectful representation of the Islam religion. As I said earlier, it is more of a personal quandary than anything. Apart from the usage of roles that were based upon vampires, which is ultimately a mere preferential issue, I don't have any complaints for the series. Just in my opinion, I think there are titles from its catalog that pack a better punch. With that being said, there is a reason as to why I picked Midnight Mass to be discussed here. When it comes to supernatural horror with psychological undertones that delves into the social stigma encompassing around mental health and addiction, it doesn't get any better than this series. The subtle yet sharp social commentary about the backward mentality that sprouts from being consumed by all those ancient books and its stories is nothing short of writing brilliance. Mike Flanagan poignantly tackles the concept of religious faith, subjecting the viewers to its glorious and unsettling phases, and leaves them with the freedom to decide where they want to devote their remaining human faith. Even though it opposes a great deal of outdated religious ideologies, it isn't anti-religious by any means. Christianity at any point isn't painted as malicious in itself, but how it is so easily abused by individuals with malintent. A good deal of the core characters either fall for such messages or they themselves spread it. But by the time it all concludes, their viewpoint vastly reforms after witnessing the destruction of human life that they thought they were saving. As that's what the series was trying to convey, by portraying what is and can be done with no repercussions in the name of religion, using it as a defense mechanism to commit atrocities towards a group of people who have different views or way of living. The finale of Midnight Mass can be somewhat devastating. However, there is a hopeful feel to it, as if the damages that were done was necessary to help the people come to terms to the downside of their limited conception of humanity beyond that island. A lot can be and has been said about this series, but as you can easily judge from the runtime of this video, there is more to be said about this topic, as this was simply used to lure in more viewers to illustrate something that has been sparsely disclosed to the Western world.
So many questions that this case raised about my own beliefs and the society. There's such a thin line between faith and delusion. Where does faith end and where does delusion start, Where do you draw the line?
This line from House of Secrets, The Burari Deaths, has stuck with me ever since I watched it for the first time. It is neither a film or a television series like the earlier examples, but a 3-part docu-series about an inexplicable incident. Or that's how it seems at first. It recounts a case that stunned an entire nation for reasons that are cell-shocking and stomach-churning at the same time. An occurrence that can horrify even the darkest, fantasized and fictionalized piece of media. 11 people are found dead in Burari, a locality situated in Delhi, the capital city of India. A joint family consisting of people from 3 different generations, who, by the looks of it, hung themselves in unison. After further examination of the crime spot from the authorities, the conclusion they come to almost leaves them baffled. No sign of forced entry or marks and scratches in their bodies indicating restraint to any degree. By all accounts, it looked like it was done willingly by every single member of the family. A case as mystifying like this quickly caught the attention of the journalists, as they came swarming to the scenario to document everything as it developed. And as usual, the media sensationalized it for their own benefits. To put it lightly, things weren't in the control of, well, anybody, as the officials struggled to conceal some of the gruesome details of the case. Both parties can be held accountable for their incompetence while dealing with this sensitive situation, where they failed to properly protect or inform about it. However, the family and the secrets they had is far more intriguing, and that's where I want to focus, which is exactly what the director of the series had in mind. Leena Yadav, direction-wise, came from a narrative background, something that is quite tough to be in charge of while making a documentary. The recording process and production are miles apart from your traditional films or series, but she manages to display certain aspects of the deaths that occurred and why they happened in the way they did, which majority of the news outlet, by the sound of it, deliberately tried to avoid. Rather than that, they opted to go with more outlandish and conspiratorial options, which, as we all know, will garner more attention to their channels. Now, to get a better understanding of the deaths, we, or more so you, the person watching, have to understand the country where it all happened. India is a nation that is driven by two things: religion and cricket, which in itself is a religion to a large chunk of the population. A country that is as diverse as one can get, it goes through numerous festivals every passing month, and inhabitants who devote themselves to such tradition seem to get a new surge of life while anticipating and preparing for that occasion. Even if it is for a brief time, the community and their surroundings start to function in a proper fashion, as it doesn't just occupy a small section of their personality. For many, it is their entire identity, a sign of their allegiance to patriotism, a tool that basically functions as a means to ostracize other religious groups by depicting them as problematic or being anti-national in nature. It isn't about who or what one chooses to satisfy their spiritual needs, but what is simply right and what is clearly wrong. This level of devotion can be deluding, shrouding them and their conscience with false promises of a holy life, which allows all these so-called disciples of God to control them as their pawns to commit hate crimes in the name of religion. These spineless people aren't retelling their religion, but retailing religion. It isn't anything more than a scummy means to generate income for them, targeting desperate people who are suffering from despair to sell them hope and faith, which millions of Indians either fall for or are ridden of this damaging, demoralizing, and defeating mentality. A cycle of death and destruction in the pursuit of a divine meaning behind living and afterlife. We already had a bitter past of being persuaded by harmful religious practices to enact inhumane activities just because we were brought up with those ideals, something that the older generation still suffer from. This endless loop feeds on the hopelessness of a society that is afraid to bring forth and discuss topics that it dearly needs to. They are fearful of the same religious faith that is supposed to bring tranquility to their lives. And the extremity of that is shown in this case that cost the lives of 11 individuals and drastically changed the life of dozens who were close to them. A family that was blinded by the words of a troubled man, whose past was full of unfortunate accidents that led him into believing that his long-deceased father's soul was inhabiting him to depart the others with rules to follow about how to conduct themselves for the betterment of the whole family, carrying out acts that were seen as a sacrifice to achieve that common goal of theirs. Such was the situation in the one that took their lives. In their eyes, it was a normal day where everything was going to be fine. All of them thought they were going to be saved by their original head and guardian of the family. A delusion this deep and detrimental to the psyche is almost unbelievable from an outside perspective, and bewildering as to how it was even allowed to happen. In a company of people with academic degrees and young adults who were of similar age as mine, who failed to look past what they were fed with, which they thought was their reality that they weren't supposed to question. A structure that is also common in most Indian families, who exercise whatever dated traditional interest their ancestors practiced while guising it as their cultural right to do so, which by all means is a morally corrupt thing to do. It is almost frustrating to witness the series of events that the family went through, and equally how it was treated or mistreated by a bunch of people who themselves are apprehensive to openly converse about it. It fills my heart with a painful confusion that the place where Bhagavad Gita is widely consumed, a holy scripture that talks about depression and mental health, can birth people who are so absent-minded towards such issues. As in the end of the day, that's all this case shone a light to. A testament to how less we acknowledge anything revolving around our mental well-being, trying our best to either conceal them or disapprove their importance, or in this case, mislabeling it as something otherworldly in the hopes to understand it, as that was the only way they could cope with it, being a victim of their wretched circumstances who can't be blamed for what they did to themselves. The tragedy that this was only took place merely 4 years ago, and that to me is the most haunting part about it. A loss that even from a distance feels so close that it hits harder than anything I have ever came across.
बहुत बड़ा दर्द है, इतना बड़ा गड्ढा है हृदय के अंदर कि शायद ये गड्ढा कभी भर पाएगा। और इतनी अच्छी बहन इस परिवार ने खोई है, इतनी अच्छी बेटी इस घर ने खोई है, इतने अच्छे भांजे और दामाद इस घर ने खोए हैं, इस परिवार ने खोए हैं कि शायद आने वाली 7 पीढ़ी भी उनकी कमी पूरी नहीं कर पाएगी।